And a fresh welcome to those who are joining us online at this time for our talk with Marilyn. So Marilyn Vetter is a visionary leader and accomplished professional who recently made headlines by being appointed as the CEO of Pheasants Forever, a renowned conservation organization dedicated to preserving and enhancing wildlife habitats across Canada and the United States. The nonprofit, which also includes Quail Forever, has 130,000 members in more than 750 local chapters, 452 employees, and had a budget of almost $100 million this last year. Marilyn's remarkable journey to the helm of Pheasants Forever is rooted in her North Dakota upbringing, actually growing up outside the small town of Animus and attending school in Harvey. And of course, as well as her years at UND, all of which shaped her values, knowledge, and leadership skills. Today, we have the privilege of hearing directly from Marilyn as she shares her insights, experiences, and the perspectives on her career, as well as her thoughts on philanthropy and its crucial role in advancing conservation efforts. We are very eager to learn from her wisdom and to be inspired by her remarkable achievements. Please help me welcome Marilyn Vetter.
Thank you, Deanna.
Well, welcome, Marilyn.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you for arranging for spring.
Yes, I know. I think you brought spring to us.
We'll make it a combined effort.
Yes, yes.
You definitely inspired us with your beautiful suit. It's been carried throughout the room.
Well, thank you, thank you. So Marilyn, first of all, congratulations on your recent appointment as CEO of Pheasants Forever. That's phenomenal. Can you share with us some of the highlights from your career that led you to this position, and what has that journey looked like for you?
So if someone would have asked me 35 years ago, would you be involved in this organization? And I wouldn't have even been able to see myself that. So I think that's the one message to the students in the room is have a vision, but always keep your eyes open because you don't know what will change in your life. So, you know, my career, I started as a journalist after leaving UND, and it was just a wonderful training grounds for everything that I did in life. Communications, and in fact, you talk to people and they'll say what's wrong usually in organizations, and it's communications. And so no matter what skills that I deploy on a daily basis, everything that I learned was at the root of that. And in fact, when I got into the biopharmaceutical space, it was really helpful for me to have those skills present. And then in being in that space, learned strategic development and leadership and very complex organizations. And one of the things that people don't realize about NGOs, particularly when you think about Pheasants Forever, and now we're almost nearly 500 employees, is it's a very complex space. You're working with agencies and partners and volunteers and staff, and so it really was a great training ground from that. But along with my career, I've been a volunteer my whole life. Mm-hmm. My parents really instilled that in all of us, and if you know any of my siblings, you know that they're all very, very active volunteers. And so throughout life, I've just been able to marry my professional world with learning through my volunteer space. And I was on the board about 7.5 years ago at Pheasants Forever and really got to know the organization well. I'd been a member for almost 30 years, but I didn't get to know the staff really well until I joined the board. And then when Howard Vinson announced his retirement about a year ago, it seemed like a really great way for me to marry my professional and personal lives.
Yeah. So 30 years, you watched. This was not a snap decision on your part. No. You had kind of gotten to know what was going on, and you had a really good history. But one of the unique things as CEO, when you stepped into this, well, you were only the third CEO of the organization, correct? Mm-hmm. And you were the first woman CEO for the organization. So what opportunities or challenges did that present to you stepping into this organization?
So it's interesting, and Susan Pelages, who's on our Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever board and a member of your faculty here, we've talked about that. Was the organization ready for that? Mm-hmm. And it was one of my concerns, honestly, in the beginning. And I'm so thrilled that the organization has, from every member I've met, it has not been a challenge and has been absolutely seen as an opportunity. And I started on February 1st, and by the 18th, we were at our big annual meeting in Minneapolis. And I can't tell you how many elderly gentlemen came up to me and thanked me for taking a leadership role so that their daughters and granddaughters and great-granddaughters could see themselves in these spaces someday. And it was so affirming that it was the right choice. And there aren't a lot of women leading NGOs in the conservation space. One really legend is Becky Humphreys from the Turkey Federation, and she just retired. So I think if there's a challenge that there's not I don't have a network of 10 CEOs that I can call that are like facing the same challenges. But I think what's exciting is that there's such an amazing pipeline of women coming up through the conservation space. Many of them are at this table right here. And it's exciting to really see that transformation happening in the industry.
Absolutely. That just makes my heart very happy when you say they would come up to you and say, now my daughters, my granddaughters can see a path. I mean, that's amazing, the trail that you're blazing there. And I tie it back to, for many of our students on campus, and Ashley is one of them, Ashley Rodriguez, our Drew Shadeen Scholarship, is a first-generation college student. And you are a first-generation college student. So tell us about that journey and what made you decide to come to UND, and what was it like for you as not having seen a parent or anybody go through that experience?
So in fact, I was talking to someone on your staff earlier today. She asked about where my mother grew up, and we were talking about the fact that our grandmothers probably knew each other. And we were talking about the fact that when I went through my mother's things most recently, I found her 8th grade diploma, which gave her the opportunity to go to a high school. Never got to, but it was such a different time, and how far we've come since the 30s. And so my parents never had that opportunity. They really wanted all of us to do it if we thought that was of interest to us. And of the 7 of us, 4 of us that went to at least some point of higher education. 3 of us came here, and so I had an older brother and an older sister that came here. And when I knew that I was going to go in-state, it was just never a question, I suppose. And the university found me. They gave me a scholarship, a leadership scholarship, and I'll never forget opening that letter. I still have it. It was such an amazing feeling to know that that was a relief for me. We were not a family with really any wealth, and that was that opportunity that opened doors for me.
Oh yes, those scholarships are critical even still today.
Yes, they are.
And you talk about not having any wealth in your family, and your mother had an 8th grade education, your father same 8th grade education, raising this family of 7. As you think back to it, what was philanthropy in your household like? Or what was your first memory of having a giving conversation, a heartfelt conversation growing up in your family?
So we went to church every Sunday, and no matter how little money there was in the house, when they passed the basket around, we always tithed. And they would ask us to do the same to some degree. So if you got birthday money, if you got $10 from all of your aunts and uncles and godparents, then you should at least give $1 here and there. And so they asked us to do the same. They set that example for certain. I think more than anything is they knew that they had time and they had talent, and they didn't have a lot of treasure. And so they gave that freely. They volunteered with their church, most certainly, but every neighbor, every cousin, aunt, and uncle that needed them at some space, they were there. When new farmers moved into the area, my dad was always the first one to go over and help. If they needed to leave, I'll never forget when my mom was like, well, we're going to milk the Franklin's goats this week. And that was a new experience, but they had to be out of town. And so that was how they instilled in us that community, which you talked about earlier, is that connection, was we are tethered by the experiences that we have. And that's where philanthropy, where you are in your life, if you have time, talent, and treasure, and we all have different points in our life where we have more of one than the other, those create not just the rewarding experiences, but the relationships. The closest relationships I have really in my life have come from those volunteering opportunities.
Yeah, that's so true, that volunteer piece, you know. I too grew up on a farm, and my first experience has to do with going to church and putting your envelope in, but we never talked about it. We didn't have a conversation. I would ask my parents, well, what are you putting in? Well, that's not something we talk about. Isn't that interesting? But now we want to talk about it. And how do you start conversations with, whether it's your colleagues at work or female friends or male friends, how can we start that conversation of philanthropy and say it's more than just the money?
So I think you have to find what people are passionate about. If it is the alma mater, if it's maybe it's American Cancer Society because you have a family member that they helped along the way. When you can get people talking about what gets them excited, then you can start having conversations about, have you engaged in a way that where you feel like you are now giving back in a way that makes you feel like you're part of that? Makes you more connected to it. So when I think about the times that we're involved with Pheasants Forever, it was not just because we really believed in the organization. It was my husband and I are what I call DIY hunters. We don't own land of our own, and so we're big proponents of public lands. And the North American way to hunt the landscape is we are blessed. We are absolutely blessed, and that is only done with continued investment. So for us, it was, well, we have not only a passion for it, but a responsibility. Oh. So when you can find that connection in people, like, what is it that means the most to you? And over the years, whether it's, for me, it's been professional associations, it's been dog-related organizations because my husband and I are involved in that space, whether it was with student associations, it was how do you get people to really dive into their passion? And you just bring them along. You have to ask people to do it the first time. I think a lot of people are uncomfortable, but once they do it, they're absolutely just entranced by it.
Right.
It changes your life.
That's so true. And in that volunteering piece, I think, you know, for many of us that grew up in small towns or on farms, there's always a lot of opportunities to volunteer, or in many cases, when you were young, we were probably voluntold. Yes, yes. You talk about milking the goats.
Milking goats.
I would have preferred that over picking the eggs at the neighbor's house. I didn't want to do that. They were not very nice.
We have similar memories.
I'm like, please don't make me go to the hen house, please. But I have to take a side route here, just because I know there's a lot of dog lovers. What kind of dogs do you and your husband have, and what's the dog-related opportunities you have?
So German short-haired pointers, when you're a birder, as we have some in the room. You know, it was funny, when I graduated from college, we didn't have a dog while we were in college. It was impractical.
Yes.
And so as soon as I got out of college, my husband, he had the itch. We both grew up with dogs. I grew up with cattle dogs, and he grew up with hunting dogs. And he got a Labrador. He had a yellow lab for 4 days. And my husband is very much like myself. Our temperaments are fairly similar, and he was like, it just doesn't feel right. And so we went back to the breeder and said, it's just too calm. So I'm at work one night, and I get a call, because there's no texting back then yet, and he says, I just bought a puppy. And we got our first German short-haired pointer, and she was just a dream, and by all counts, we did everything wrong with her first dog, like lots of people do. And we had her hunting by the time she was 3.5 months old, and then we had 2, and then we had 3, and then, it caught on fire. And he is an amazing dog trainer. He, as I say, he has more ability in his pinky than I do in my entire body. I'm the puppy wrangler, he's the puppy trainer. And for us, and when I think about, you asked me about my journey, and I was thinking about as I was driving here, that there's been a dog attached to my journey pretty much my whole life. I was the youngest of 7. My siblings were a lot older than me. My dog was my buddy, just like Susan's little girl's dog is her buddy. It was my companion. Yeah. And then throughout life, there's always just been a dog by my side. So they truly are people's best friends, not
Yes,
just
they
man's.
are. Yes, they are. Yes, they are. Well, thanks for that. See, you never know where this is going to go.
You never know.
Okay, so back to passion and responsibility. So you mentioned the philanthropy and volunteering and finding things that you're passionate about and being responsible about our responsibility to carry on some of those. Let's take that to the corporate level, to your big company. So how do you infuse philanthropy or that feeling of passion and responsibility for your team, your almost 500 employees, and not just about the organization, but what about philanthropy for the corporation itself outside of what you do on a day-to-day basis?
So it's fascinating. Most of our team is really charged with volunteering throughout their work year. They are. If 750 chapters are all supported by our staff. So if there's 500 events a year and banquets, they're dependent upon us to be there.
Wow.
And almost all of them are involved in numerous chapters across the country. And in fact, I get a lot of emails from them like, oh, we had just a gangbuster banquet the other night. We raised $30,000 or $50,000. They get as much energy from the volunteer opportunities. Really, it helps them, inspires them throughout the day and throughout the, when you have a bad day at work and you can go spend a night with volunteers and get that energy you get from them. It really is, it's just a fabric of the entire organization. It is a very giving organization. The employees, they have more time sometimes than they have treasure when they're working for nonprofits. That can be a challenge, but they all give a tremendous amount of time. And whenever you work for a nonprofit, people are there because they're passionate about it. And so being surrounded by volunteers that share that passion is really important to them.
Oh, it so is. And I should mention too that in 2022, you wrapped up your Call of the Uplands campaign, a 6-year campaign, correct?
It was.
That raised $565 million. That's amazing.
It was
that
incredible.
is amazing.
It was.
So that is really phenomenal support from your donors. How did you really corral that support, and how did you show appreciation to your donors? I know we have a number of nonprofit leaders who we talk as a community about the importance of stewardship and saying thank you. How do you do that with all of your volunteers, many more volunteers than you have staff, really?
So it's funny, we're in the stewardship phase right now, and I'm going to an event on Thursday in Rapid City, and that's what we're starting every event with, is really that thank you first. This was a first campaign for us.
Oh, wow.
And we learned a lot about it. And I don't think we actually assumed that our members were going to ever think about our organization from a philanthropic lens. It, for us, was a first. And so stewardship is that. It made me laugh because I had told the team that, how can I help with this? And I said, I'm happy to write personal notes and letters to people. And so they sent me my spreadsheet the other day of my personal notes. So I'm going to be breaking out the cursive in the next couple of days and writing a couple hundred little handwritten notes. But I think it's certainly that, but I think it's really connecting to people and making sure that you can get into those communities and then really demonstrate how we're making a difference there. I don't think our members thought about it from a philanthropic perspective before. They thought of themselves as members and not part of it, and they really embraced the legacy leaving for themselves. When you think about landowners and the transition of lands that are going to take place in the next decades, as farm families change and children move off the farms and aren't engaged, they're looking for opportunities to leave a legacy, and that was for many people the first time that they'd actually thought about that.
Yeah. That is so true. We talk about in the nonprofit scape the trillions and trillions of wealth transfer that is going to take place over the next 30 years. And especially in our tri-state region here, where I would guess you have a lot of members, that land piece. And so how do you start having those conversations around legacy? And in my opening comments, we talked about, for me, it was the men sitting at the table and the wife or the daughter wasn't. How do you bring the family or bring that new perspective to the table with you when you're having those conversations? Because this, I think of it, and it probably isn't anymore, but I think of it as very male-dominated organizations.
Well, certainly from our membership perspective, I think, but that's changed a lot. I think we know that if we're going to have a heritage going forward of conservation and hunting, we have to have the entire family involved. And so you, as I said, see a lot more women in the space, and when that happens, then the whole family comes with. That has changed it. I think when we sit down with families now, we make sure their children are there too. Because to be honest, if land is going to be left behind, it's important that the children are embracing that as well, because that means they're giving up something too. And that's important. So, you know, we make sure that when we do have a piece of land that does get left by a family, that the entire family feels like they're part of that. And we recognize that on the signage of those particular locations. We had one just in Minnesota last year, and it was really wonderful. So this elderly couple donated, but all of their children came.
Oh.
And it was, I think when you can get the entire generational perspective involved, that really makes a difference, because they're sacrificing too.
Oh, for sure. And what a legacy, you used that term earlier, that those grandparents are handing down.
Yeah.
And that will continue to grow. So.
And think about the role modeling they're doing
absolutely.
for children and grandchildren.
Yeah. So when you talk about family being involved, I think of Dr. Felicia here, and where's Alyssa? Alyssa Connickson from our team did an article in the Alumni magazine. And one of my most favorite pictures was Susan and her husband and their little girl, who was 3 at that point, too, or not even 2, out there hunting with them. But it is, you've got to start this transition early and help individuals understand the importance of conservation.
And connection. It doesn't, you don't necessarily have to be a hunter to feel that connection. And in fact, most of us that feel that connection, it isn't really about the hunting part of it. It's why we're there, but that's not why we feel the connection. It's, you know, from a little kid on, we were talking about with some of Susan's students yesterday that growing up on a cattle ranch, you just inherently feel that connection to the lands, and the stewardship that has to be done, whether you're a farmer or a rancher, and how important that is. And so for me, when I get back out and convene in nature, that's that connection to something that's way bigger than we are. And I think that's when we try to get children outdoors. They don't have to become hunters to be conservationists. They have to understand the feeling, though, they get from that connection to something that is so much more important than that day. It is that lifetime of the steward of the lands.
I could see where the journalist background comes in very handy when you're having these conversations.
Yeah.
So, as we've talked about the fundraising program that you've talked about some of the transitions taking place, but what are some of the key initiatives or other projects that you're currently excited and passionate about leading as CEO for these organizations?
One in particular, and that's certainly maybe not novel in our space, it is broadening that base of people that see themselves in our world. And that is whether it's youth, whether it's women, whether it's children, whether it's other ethnicities that have not experienced the North American conservation space. It's really making them feel like they're a welcome part of that. And that the organization has really taken hold in that, and it's been, our employees are quite young. Our average age of our member is 60, and the average age of our employee is 34.
Oh, wow, very interesting.
So when you think about it, a lot of very young biologists that are coming out of academia, they want to be connected to people that, yes, landowners, but they also want to be connected with people like themselves. And so they're very engaged in their communities, which takes me to my second thing that I'm most excited about is, I was really thrilled when you talked about the power of we. And for me, connection is really important, whether it's connection to each other, connection to mission, but quite honestly, connection to community. And so we did a couple of these little pilot projects. Aberdeen, South Dakota is one of them. Patagonia and Sonoyta, Arizona is another, where we went into a community and said, let's sit down with business owners and landowners and hunters and enthusiasts and talk about how transformational this is in your communities. And so Aberdeen, South Dakota completely embraced this and said, we know how important this is to our economy. So they have found ways to work with landowners, incentivize them so that they're engaged. And so you see this entire community engaged in conservation. And it's blossomed for the community. Of course, Main Street is benefited by all of the people that come through in the fall, right, and at least 4 months of the year. But that, and then in the off season, the community's involved in work days and sitting down with landowners and saying, what do you still need? What is not working out of this? And a funny little story, so I didn't start till February 1st. So my husband and I said, let's go on a quick trip to Arizona before I take the job, and we stayed in Sonoyta in Patagonia, Arizona. And you would have thought that the team knew I was going, and they went like with an advanced team. Because every place I went in, there was a little Quail Forever bumper sticker on everything. There was, I went in the coffee shop, and then I finally asked one of the business owners, I'm like, okay, who set this up? Why do you all have Quail Forever stickers here? And he was like, no, the team came down a couple of years ago, and they talked about how important it was. And in fact, the hotel owner in Patagonia, Arizona said that short season is 60% of the revenues.
Oh my goodness.
And so for her, it showed how important that she had that connection. And then that touched on her sense of responsibility of, well, I need to do my part so that these hunters not only continue to return, but they have a responsibility to make sure that the lands are managed well. And so it really was fun to see that community come together. And it's hard to do that all over. Mm-hmm. So what we're trying to do is really find those pockets across the country where you talk about economic development and how that transects with communities and the people that live there and their conservation space. And so we're really excited about to be able to find a handful more of those communities this year to really partner with them.
That's phenomenal. So this partnership, I'm guessing we talked about the dollars involved in your campaign, but what about the membership side? Has that helped to drive some new members, and are you seeing growth in your membership base as well?
Yeah, in fact, I was proud to say that our membership statistic has changed pretty dramatically since we gave that to you. So COVID was hard on lots of organizations' memberships, and so we're back to pre-COVID membership levels, and thankfully, right after Pheasant Fest, we hit 145,000.
Wow.
And so, will these communities chug out, 5,000, 10,000 people? Probably not. But if, like everybody knows about conservation and philanthropy, it's more important who turns out and what they do than opposed to the numbers. So we hope that we continue to get really dedicated members that want to make a difference. But yes, it does certainly help with membership.
Yeah. So do you have any specific youth programs that you're trying to get them involved earlier? And can you talk about that, and how has that helped? Maybe you said your average membership age is 60. Has that helped bring that down a little bit, or how are you sustaining that membership?
Yeah, so we're definitely trying to do that, and you try to hit people throughout life. So there are children that are involved in the organization. There's lots of youth events. There's lots of youth hunting events. There's lots of youth pollinator events to try to teach children just about how can they have particularly when you think about community gardens in urban areas, that's a great way for kids to get involved in pollinators, and we try to tap in where we can there. And then when kids go to college, there's a few campus chapters across the country, but not a lot, and most of them don't have a lot of the time. But that's typically when you see that student come back into that space and try to get them involved, most certainly there. And grandparents are really great about trying to get their grandchildren involved, and so we know that that's a place that we really have to lean in hard in the next few years, so that we have an enthusiastic audience that is prepared to be able to take those shoes of those folks that want to retire and enjoy the lands and not have to do the work so much anymore.
Right. Absolutely. Oh, interesting. So let's talk a little bit more about your organization. And you mentioned membership took a hit during COVID. We all, saw declines in some of what we were doing. And we also faced challenges in retaining and recruiting team members. So what have you done to create that nurturing or productive culture within your organization, and how are you dealing with any of these remote work issues or keeping team members engaged?
So remote was, I suppose you could say we were, remote work for us was cool before it was cool, because, our wildlife biologists are spread all across the country. So we've never had a very big staff in the White Bear Lake office. But we did have up to about 50, and now we're down to probably more like 20, and not because people were laid off, it's because they chose to relocate, they moved in different spaces. But a great example, so when you, again, nonprofits, it's sometimes hard to tap into particularly professional staff. And we had an orientation for new employees not long ago, and someone from the accounting team said, I want to let you know my story. She was so excited to have joined the organization. She lives in very remote Texas, truly on the border with Mexico. And she said, I moved there because I wanted to be closer to family and I wanted to be in a more rural setting, but I was worried I was never going to be able to get a job again in my field. And so now she's this fully remote accountant that is loving her attachment to the organization. And so it's allowed us to think really differently. Like, how can we deploy people across the country that might already be like-minded, that already have some of those interests, that we can now bring them in a way that they might not be a wildlife biologist, but they might still support the mission.
Right.
And so that's been really important. But when you think about nurturing cultures, it's really about respect and trust. And that really takes work. And so that means that we engage with our employees, and we just did a town hall not long ago and let them submit questions and like, what are you thinking about? Because new person at the helm, the first thing they might know is like, are we going to be going back to the office, or are we still going to do no remote work? You want to be able to let people have that forum, to have that relationship. And in the leadership space, they talk about being psychological safety. Right. You really want people to feel like they have a place there, and that creates that culture that's productive. When you think about productive cultures, they have psychological safety. They feel like they're heard, they're not taken advantage of, they're respected, they are trusted, they trust their leaders. And honestly, there's a couple of other things. They really know what their job is. Clarity is so important of like, what can I control in my space? How am I empowered? How can I be my best self at work? And when you allow people that empowerment, it builds their confidence, it builds courage. And so when you see that, and we have really a lot of leaders that are very passionate about not just the mission, but their members. And that's really been fun to watch them grow as leaders, and really has just unleashed a very, not only productive, but I think a very innovative team.
Yeah, that's lovely. You talk about respect and trust your team, and I think oftentimes we think about respect and trust your donors, respect and trust your customers. You have to treat your teammates the same way, with that respect and trust. And I love your comment about empowering them to lead more and to find their way. So throughout your career, you've reached a lot of significant milestones that impacted your journey in many different ways. So what advice do you have for aspiring leaders here who are looking to make that meaningful difference, or maybe a change in their careers and their communities through philanthropy or leadership? What advice would you have for those aspiring leaders?
Never miss an opportunity to network, because you never know who that person you meet could be your next best friend. They could be your inspiration. And that was something that was taught to me really early on, was that network that you create. And you see it on campuses, I think, when you think about people that join fraternities and sororities, that's what they talk about. They have this lifelong network, which is what you often find that people will have in organizations of philanthropy. When they volunteer, they get this lifelong network. So I would say, first and foremost, never pass up an opportunity to network. Definitely be open-minded about your career. Have an idea of what you want to do. I go back and check my records. I was an undecided student until my 4th semester because I was insatiably curious. And when I finally let myself be like, that's okay to be curious, until I found what my sweet spot was. And so I would say continue to do that. And then even when you find it, that doesn't mean you don't look left or right. You know, peripheral vision is where you really see some gems. And I would have, again, not thought that this was where my professional and volunteering world was going to take me. And in fact, it took a little nudging from people like, yeah, you should do it. Because I had this vision in my mind of who the CEO should be.
Yeah.
And so that's the other thing I think is find mentors that you can really connect to. And be very clear with them. That's what you want, is a mentor. And then what does that mean for you? You know, having mentors, and to be on the other side of that, it's really important that you're driving that conversation. Mm-hmm. You're driving that relationship. So when you come to that, having coffee once a month, come with a list of things that you want to talk about. What do you need guidance about? Really lean into that and trying to find people that inspire you, because mentors can make all the difference, really, because now you get to tap into their network. And they're the ones that are talking about you when you can't be in the room. And that's when a lot of times magic is made, is when you're not even there.
Right, right. So those are great pieces of advice. Now let's flip it and say, okay, how do we as individuals become advocates for those individuals? And I mean, I know STEM has been important in your life too, and of course the conservation side, but how do we become better advocates for the females around us?
So first of all, you have to accept the hard work. You need to know that, and you have to be willing to do it. And so for me, I think if you're going to be someone's mentor, if you're going to be someone's sponsor, don't take it lightly. It's super important. You can change their life. Probably then the next thing is, don't assume you know what they need. I think that's the hardest part that I've struggled with over the years of like, I just know, and I'm like, oh, sit on your hands. Ask questions, because you don't know necessarily what inspires them. And assuming can be so damaging, because all of a sudden when you've said, you should do this, if you have someone that's not willing to say, I don't know, I don't think that's a good idea, all of a sudden you've pushed them in a direction perhaps they don't want to be. So being inquisitive and really finding out, helping people find their own sweet spot, but don't find it for them. I think it's really, really important to find out what they want and then encourage them to do that. And then it is to open your networks for sure, to be there when they can't be there, to then, and that's that opening that network all the time of even years later, be like, I thought of you when I met this person because they're so passionate about this and I've heard you talk about it. Connections take time, but it's just like relationships. They should take time, but they give back tenfold, and you'll never regret it.
Absolutely. Yeah, that connection piece. Don't forget who you met back in college, or that first job you had as a journalist. You never know where that next connection is going to take you.
And never burn a bridge.
And never burn a bridge. And I also love the piece about listen, don't assume.
Yeah.
We are quick to, I can help you, because we want to be so helpful.
We want to help.
So I've got an idea, but no, like you said, you have to sit on your hands and listen.
Yeah.
And that sometimes is the most help that you can give too. So it's hard to believe, but we're coming up on the end of our time. We're
getting our signal.
Yep. And so you brought up the term legacy. So let me ask you a two-part question. What is the legacy you would like to leave when you're done being CEO of Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever? What is your legacy there professionally that you want to leave? And what's your personal legacy that you would like to leave?
So I think Pheasants Forever, and I guess I haven't thought about legacy, you know, when you're following a CEO who's there for 23 years, it's hard to think about legacy because he's a legend. I think if anything, it's that community-based connection to conservation, that people accept that I have a role in that, and it's not someone else's job. Because if we don't all accept that role, whether we're birders or hikers or mountaineers, it really doesn't matter. We all have to own this North American model of the outdoors is here because the people before us protected it. It is our responsibility to do the same, or it won't stay. Yeah. So I think it's that getting communities really involved in their involvement in it. I'd say from a personal perspective, to stop the existential crisis in volunteerism. I really worry about, it is the one thing that keeps me up, is that people are very eager to write a check and not get engaged. And that's important too. Treasure is super important. But think about the times you've written a check. It's because you are connected. It's your alma mater, it's a healthcare group, it's your local community. You have an engagement that was created through time and talent, which makes you inspired to give treasure. If people don't volunteer, they never build the connection. And so it's a very short-sighted thing if we think, well, if I can get a check today, but I don't worry about them being engaged, someday they won't be engaged. And that's probably the most important thing for me, is that people understand the value to themselves personally and to an organization to be involved on all 3 T's, time, talent, and treasure.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's wonderful. I have a feeling that you will be a legend for Pheasants
Well, the
Forever.
state is legendary.
Yeah, the state is legendary. And you are already legendary here.
Thank
We're
you.
so thankful that you do have a connection with us, and what you've done for our state, for our university, for our students. And we do get an opportunity to recognize Marilyn again this fall during homecoming, when she will be awarded the Alumni Award for Distinguished Service and Leadership. And so she'll be back on campus, and we'll have an opportunity to hear from her again. But I feel like we could just stay up here and visit all day, but we do have other things to accomplish. So I really want to thank you so much for being a part of our Women for Philanthropy Luncheon.
Don't forget your QR code.
That's right, that's right. You are inspirational. Yes, I like this. True inspiration, and you just wrapped it up perfectly on how we all can use our time, talent, and treasure. It's all 3. And I think we talked about this earlier, that sometimes philanthropy, the term can seem intimidating, because I don't have enough money to be a philanthropist. I can't make a gift. I'm not wealthy enough to be a philanthropist. But there are so many different ways to make that gift: time and talent. And you said that's one of the things that worries you the most, that volunteerism. So yes, before we go, you have the QR code on your table, but you also have another little round piece of paper, and that also has a QR code on it. So if you scan that QR code, it will take you to the poem Breathe by Becky Hemsley. I don't know if many of you have heard of her. I am a huge Becky Hemsley fan. And it caught my attention recently, and I wanted to share it with you. You can read the poem yourself, but in a nutshell, it's about a young girl finding resistance in her effort to follow what others expect of her. Here are 2 lines from the poem. She sat at the back, and they said she was shy. She led from the front, and they hated her pride. At the end of the poem, she discovers a clearing in the woods where she finds solitude and a place to breathe. In the spirit of this poem, I'm excited to share that each of you here today, in your names, we will make a donation to plant a tree in the Chippewa National Forest in northern Minnesota. That's a total of 150 trees. So together, we're going to help maintain the forest as a special place for us to go breathe. And just like trees and plants need care and attention to grow, finding our own space to breathe requires that intentional effort and self-care. Don't forget about each of you sitting here and the intentional effort to put into yourself to help you grow and breathe. So thank you again for being here today. Thank you, Marilyn. Let's give another round of applause for our doctor.
Thank you. It was wonderful.
Yeah.